like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for December 1st. Can you believe it? I'm your current president, Ashley Wesley. Thank you so much for being here. Michael, please show the flag graphic for 15 seconds of respectful silence. We ask that you remain on mute and take this time to personally reflect. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Martha Wales, who will be offering our reflection today.
You've muted me. Okay, I'm on.
We can hear you.
All right. I can't resist starting with a quote from Eeyore of Winnie the Pooh. For any of us who are feeling isolated, one can't complain. I have my friends. Someone spoke to me only yesterday. I'm not a serious person, and perhaps I shouldn't be allowed to give reflections. Nonetheless, in honor of the baseball fans in this group, and I hope some jazz fans, and because we can all use a little humor, I'd like to read a short interview with Yogi Berra, that's the baseball part of it, who explains jazz. Interviewer: can you explain jazz? Yogi: I can't, but I will. 90% of all jazz is half improvisation. The other half is the part people play while others are playing something they never played with anyone who played that part. So if you play the wrong part, it's right. If you play the right part, it might be right if you play it wrong enough. But if you play it too right, it's wrong. I don't understand. Yogi: anyone who understands jazz knows that you can't understand it. It's too complicated. That's what's so simple about it. Interviewer: do you understand it? No, that's why I can explain it. If I understood it, I wouldn't know anything about it. Are there any great jazz players alive today? No, all the great jazz players alive today are dead, except for the ones that are still alive. But so many of them are dead that the ones that are still alive are dying to be like the ones that are dead. Some would kill for it. What is syncopation? That's when the note that you should hear now happens either before or after you hear it. In jazz, you don't hear notes when they happen because that would be some other type of music. Other types of music can be jazz, but only if they're the same as something different from those kinds. Now I really don't understand. I haven't taught you enough for you not to understand jazz that well. So may we all have something to smile at today.
Thank you so much, Martha. That was a bright spot today. Thank you for sharing.
Didn't have much to do with Rotary, but it was cheerful.
It has a lot to do with Rotary, in my opinion. Okay, so I'd like to welcome our guests today. And our first guest is the mother of our speaker, Edie McNeely Henderson. Welcome. We're so glad you could join us today. And Rotarian Becky Jesmer has a few guests. Would you like to introduce them? Are they here? Going once? Okay. Well, if they are here later, we'll catch up. Are there any other guests that I haven't mentioned? Susan?
Susan Adams from New Albany Club, joining today.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
And I see Bob Walker. Bob is a member, I think, in the Fort Myers Rotary Club. So Bob, good to have you with us today.
And Ashley, Becky Jessmer has just entered.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if Becky's guests are here today, but she can confirm that. But we'll move on because we have a stacked agenda. So if you were invited by Becky, welcome. Should be Laura and Elizabeth, and we hope that you'll come again. Thanks to our producers, Michael Shermis, Natalie Blaze, Sally Gaskell, and Aaron Davis, who's joined the production team. Thank you for keeping things running smoothly. We're so glad to have you part of these weekly meetings. And our roundabout reporter for this week is Glenda Murray. We have quite a few membership anniversaries today, and they're all in the 30 plus club. So Kay Leach has been with us for 32 years, Keith Klein, 35 years, Scott Walters, 32 years, Brian Price, 30 years, and Jim Harvey, 45 years total. He's been 14 years in our club. So congratulations, and thank you for being a part of the Rotary family for so many years. Rotarians in the news. 17 Bloomington area people, from city and county officials to artisans and business professionals, have been named to the newly formed Waldron Recommendation Task Force that will help determine the future of the John Waldron Arts Center. The downtown center will revert from Ivy Tech Community College ownership to the city of Bloomington in January, and they've put together a task force to determine what to do next. Our very own Trent Deckard is a part of that force, so we know it's in good hands. Rotarian Chris Michael Morrison and Wheeler Mission were prominent in Sunday's Herald Times with an article discussing the increased demand for shelters as temperatures drop. He said that Wheeler Mission is close to opening a 2,100 square foot facility just north of the Men's Center, and comparatively, the Men's Center is currently 4,000 square feet. So the annex is tentatively planned to be open this week. I don't know if we can get a confirmation on that, but that's exciting. He said it'll be a multi-purpose building that will serve as a public day room for women experiencing homelessness to stay. And the space would include amenities, washers, dryers, showers, bathrooms, and case management space. Women who utilize the space would have the opportunity to be shuttled to the Opportunity Lane facility to spend the night. County and city officials joined together recently to provide the funds to support opening the winter women's shelter, which is great news, as it was closed back in July due to lack of funding. How to help, specifically the most important part, local shelters continue to accept donations and are on the lookout for volunteers with a low risk of developing complications should they contract the virus. But Morrison said staff is in need of a variety of items, including twin fitted sheets, blankets, pillowcases, hand warmers, towels, gloves, women's underwear, toilet paper, and adult diapers. And there's a full list on Amazon that you can contact Wheeler Mission for the full list to add to that. Oh, we've got a note from Chris Michael here. Hopefully by no later than next week, do need staff, and individuals can apply there to the email address in the chat. Okay, also featured in the HT regularly are the prolific Connie Shikalis, Tim Jessen, and Byron Banger, with articles this week, and I'm sure many, many more to come. So it's such a testament to the knowledge and expertise of our members that we simply can't mention every contribution and media highlight that they're featured in. If you look closely, you will always find a Rotarian involved in the mix of our community's daily life. So thank you for contributing, and we hope to keep seeing more of all of your submissions. Salvation Army has been featured in the HT and on NBC recently as their demand for their services has skyrocketed. Demands are up, contributions are down, and volunteers are hard to find. Captain Gordon Hogue says that the bell ringing is their biggest fundraiser of the year, with Red Kettle donations making up about 40% of the local budget. So they're hopeful that the Red Kettle donations will be able to fund them to their $250,000 goal to cover expenses, but they need some support. So they recommend, if you would like to, making monthly donations, and you could help out with our bell ringing. We have some spots available. Thanks to Steve Moberly for organizing our annual support of the bell ringing. And like I said, we do have some spots available, and those will be mentioned in the roundabout. One more volunteering option. We do have a few spots for the United Way Day of Action literacy backpacks. Tomorrow is full. Great. Thank you guys for signing up. We're all full all day, so we'll make a big dent in that. But on the 3rd, we have a few spots available in the morning from 10 to 11:30 and from 12 to 1:30. If you'd still like to sign up, we have some folks that need some partners. And then we have some spots available on the 4th as well. So that sign up was sent to you by email. And if it's necessary, we could send it again. So thank you to those that signed up. And we're hoping to get all of those 600 backpacks assembled this week and ready to go to our partner agencies. Okay, now enough of me. It's time for hot happy dollars. Who has our first happy dollar to share?
I'll share.
Yay.
So a year ago, my little choir, Voces Novae, did our regular Monday night rehearsal, and then we all drove over to the Wheeler Men's Mission, and we sang for the men who were already at 9 p.m. in their cots. And one of them called out, we were in a vestibule so that we were not in the actual dorm room. One of them called out and said, "Could you sing Silent Night?" So we did. We all knew it, even our Jewish members. And last night we gathered in the snow outside City Hall, and we sang one verse of Silent Night again. And Josie Rice from the Wheeler Mission was there to videotape us, and it was really moving. And, you know, we might not have liked being outside in the cold, but we actually had a great time. But the point was that the people of Wheeler Mission, who they serve, are always outside in the cold, and they're able to bring them in. So I believe the video is a fundraiser for them. I encourage you to look for it. I'm happy.
Thank you, Sally. Anyone else?
Yes, I have $20 in memory of the loss of my grandson, who would have been 20 yesterday. So it's not happy dollars, but it's memorial dollars.
Thank you, Charlotte.
I have a happy dollar. It'll be 5 happy dollars. We have a client that came to us recently that whose home had burned, and before her home had burned, she and her husband had been in an accident, and she lost her husband in the accident, and she wasn't able to work for about a year. She moved in with her mother with her 2 kids, and after about a year, the home burned. Well, you know, she came to us, and we were trying to get her into a job, and we found out she'd been working on her MBA at night while she'd been working before, and we've been connecting her with someone at Crane, and it looks like she'll be interviewing this week for a job that might be 6 figures. So we're really, really excited. We're pretty happy, and we think she'll get something no matter what, but she's got a good shot at this one.
Amazing, Sandy. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for all the work that you do to make those things possible. Thank you.
And I would just mention that today is Giving Tuesday, and you've probably all gotten a zillion emails already. But rather than have any of our agencies talk about that, I thought I'll just mention that. And so if you have dollars to share, this is a good time to do it.
I should have mentioned this last week, and I failed to, but Charlotte and a bunch of other people participated last Tuesday night in the multi-faith Thanksgiving celebration. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience of seeing the great diversity and unity within our community. So I just wanted to highlight Charlotte for reading the 100th Psalm and all the other people that participated in that beautiful event of bringing us together at Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else? Okay, well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Owen Johnson, who will introduce our speaker today.
Owen, you're muted. You're muted, Owen. Owen, you're muted.
Okay. Oh, well, we're all set now. I first met Holly Hayes and her mother in what had been once the journalism library in the old school of journalism in Ernie Pyle Hall. She was a member of a new class of Ernie Pyle scholars. She had already appeared on my radar when she crossed the street occasionally from South High School to write for the HT. Holly has strong local roots. Both sides of her family have been owners of local businesses. She went to IU. She double majored in journalism and Spanish. She actually pulled off a rare double-double, not only having a double major, but she was editor of both the IDS newspaper and the Arbutus yearbook. She was chosen as the outstanding college student in Indiana in Spanish. She loves history, especially anything to do with the Titanic or with Ernie Pyle. She took my footsteps of Ernie Pyle class. One of the essays she wrote during that class was published in the Louisville Courier-Journal. She and I worked together on an article on Pyle and the Pulitzer Prize, which was published in Traces magazine. She's approaching the completion of 5 years at the Indianapolis Star, where she's worked on several subjects. For more than a year, she covered nonprofits and charities and the people who help change lives, something very appropriate for our club. Now she is social services reporter, where she covers the myriad issues impacting families and childcare across central Indiana, including food and housing insecurity, fostering and adoption, child abuse and neglect, and healthcare issues. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Holly Hayes.
Thanks, guys, for having me. Thank you, Owen, for that introduction. I'm the highlight of my career, and I'm being very serious, and I think I told you this at the time, like I swear I peaked when that essay was published in the Courier-Journal, because it was published with something that Ernie had written, and it's not going to get cooler than that for me. I mean, maybe like I met Jimmy Carter a couple years ago. That was pretty cool. So that's like maybe my top two. But I'm really fortunate to have had a lot of really cool opportunities that came out of the journalism school, my work as an Ernie Pyle scholar, and my work with you. So thank you so much for that and for bringing me here. What I wanted to talk about today is something I worked on a couple of months ago, examining the origins of county names and then also monuments, et cetera, that are named for folks who were either slaveholders or supported otherwise what we consider racist policies. And I can talk a little bit about, if you want, how I kind of made those decisions to make those calls. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And we can start this presentation. Can everybody see everything all right? Cool. So first, just another really quick introduction. Wanted to double down on something that Owen had mentioned. This is a picture of me in London on the Footsteps trip back in the day. I've long been interested in history. Like he mentioned, am obsessed with the Titanic and the story of the disaster. Not the movie, the actual ship. And I know that that sounds a little weird, but I think that it really laid a foundation unknowingly early on that has really helped me become a more conscientious journalist and storyteller. There's an often used and now kind of cliche, but very true quote from Philip Graham about how journalism is the first rough draft of history. And that's absolutely true. And I think being a student of history and being someone who thinks critically about how those stories are told and where does our duty of care lie and are we doing that responsibly, I just feel a deep responsibility to the people I'm writing about. And I want to make sure that I'm doing this right, because I do recognize that I am, in some sense, a historian as a reporter. Everyone that I work with, my colleagues, the people that I love and respect in this business, share that sense of responsibility. And I know that there's been a lot of discourse about the folks who don't or don't necessarily do this responsibly. But the folks who are here on the local level and the folks that I work with, I can speak for them and say that this is something that we think about all the time. And it kind of caused us to reevaluate things as we went into the summer, obviously, with the death of George Floyd and the social and civil unrest that occurred, especially here in Indianapolis. I don't know if you guys followed a lot of that news. The first 2 years that I was at the Star, I spent on the public safety desk. I was the night cops reporter. So I went from Bloomington, where we have some very high profile cases of violent crime, but not a ton of violent crime, to being the only night reporter at the Star, covering crime during one of the city's deadliest years. I learned a lot on that job. I'm so grateful that I did that job, and it prepared me to be one of the Star reporters basically on the front lines during this year's unrest. I was covering protests. My colleagues and I were in the clouds, tear gas. And I think that really made me reconsider the way that we cover public safety in particular. But these events kickstarted conversations really in newsrooms across the country, and especially ours, about how we cover or don't cover communities of color. I think this has been a long time coming for Indy Star, where we've got this reckoning where Indianapolis, Marion County, it's about 28% Black and African American. That is not reflected in our coverage at all. And as I've worked with members of the community to kind of figure out how we're going to retool this coverage, one of the things that I've heard frequently is that, Black and brown folks often see themselves as victims and perpetrators in our crime coverage. They often are the main characters in stories about how terrible conditions are in Indianapolis and poverty and food insecurity, but they don't see themselves as the heroes of their own stories, even though they are out there doing the work within their community to try to make things better. And so, one thing that I've tried to do this year is really kind of focus on celebrating the folks within our Black and brown community. And I've spearheaded an effort this year as part of our Season for Sharing campaign, since it is Giving Tuesday. We raise money every year to basically improve the lives of Central Indiana children. And it has been our focus and our mission this year to partner with the African American Legacy Fund of Indianapolis. And we will grant funds specifically to grassroots organizations and youth serving organizations working within the Black community. This is an opportunity for us to put our money where our mouth is and say that we do see you, we value you, and we are investing in you. But first, before we could get there, we had to have those conversations about how do we explore our own history, being Indiana, which obviously has a long and complicated past when it comes to issues of race. But also here at Indy Star, we have a brand new executive editor. I think she's still kind of getting her feet under her, and I think that she wanted to have an opportunity to really take a critical look at some of our coverage and our failures. And so in the meantime, folks knowing that I am the history person, I guess, in the newsroom, I was asked to explore Indiana's history. Excuse me, sorry. The first step in that was really obvious to look at places and things that are named after folks who have what we now would consider racist and otherwise unsavory pasts. Monuments, gymnasiums, school buildings. I mean, places all over the country have been doing this for years. And so I obviously looked first to Bloomington because I knew that one conversation that had already been started was addressing Indiana University locations that are named for David Starr Jordan, a former university president and also a eugenicist. And that has kind of really, it's going to change, obviously, that footprint on campus and in the city. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. But some other things that I found and people that we wanted to include on this list There's a monument of William Henry Harrison on Monument Circle, and there's a high school named after him in West Lafayette. And Harrison made our list because he was pro-slavery. He opposed several congressional attempts to slow the spread of slavery or to restrict slavers. And as governor, often negotiated bad deals with local Native American tribes, basically leaving them landless with little to no compensation. And that's very damaging. So he made our list. One that I came across, and I think DNR was kind of thrown for, I kind of threw him a curveball on this one, mostly because they had a brand new spokesperson at the time, and also because they had to do a significant amount of research to try to figure out why Mount Jackson at Indiana Dunes National Park is named after Governor Edward Jackson. And when that happened, Jackson was, I believe he was governor when he opened the park. But he also obviously had, I mean, he had very close ties to the Indiana Klan. Obviously, he was supported by well-known Klan affiliates. And his tenure as governor was marred by scandals involving Indiana Grand Dragon D.C. Stevenson, who was charged and convicted of murder, of the murder of Madge Oberholzer. It's unclear when the dune was named after him and how that happened. So it was interesting to watch them kind of reevaluate, okay, we're gonna have to bring this to a board meeting. We're still not clear on the history ourselves. And I think that kind of shows what we were trying to accomplish here, which was just asking people to think a little bit harder or at all about the way that we honor certain people and whether or not there's a place for that currently. Other things that came up, a big part of the discussion in Indianapolis was the Confederate Soldiers and Sailors Monument in Garfield Park. It's a grave marker for Confederate prisoners of war. However, it was not originally located in Garfield Park. It was located in Green Lawn Cemetery, and it was moved to Garfield Park in 1928, I believe, because public officials wanted to make it more visible to the public. You'll hear that a lot with a lot of other cities that are kind of reevaluating why certain monuments are in certain places. It was not uncommon for public officials to use those monuments and place them strategically as almost an intimidation tactic to just kind of remind people what the history is, what that foundation is, and what they're really about. So there are also other Confederate burial markers in Indianapolis, Evansville, Terre Haute, and the Garfield Park Monument has been moved. It was dismantled this summer. And that had been an ongoing conversation in the city for a while. I know that it was not the first time we'd talked about it, but I think that final push this summer has really kind of changed things for those who were paying attention to it. There's also the Thomas Hendricks Monument at the Indiana State House, the Bates Hendricks House and neighborhood on the south side of Indianapolis are named for him. He made my list because he, I mean, let's be honest, said some stuff that was pretty alarming. He opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And while addressing his opposition, talking about his opposition to the 15th Amendment, said, what has this race ever produced when referring to Black folks and the right to vote? So that was a no-brainer for me. This idea, though, that we are dismantling these monuments and somehow rewriting history or sanitizing history in any way is just not the case. An IU professor that I spoke to, Rasul Moat, made a point that I very much agree with, and this is something that I've talked about in other contexts, that public memory and history are not the same thing. Something that we have to remember, and that I think is not done enough by the general public, those of us who are students of history, think very critically about the information that we are presented, right? History books are often written by and for people who will directly benefit from the narratives presented therein, right? And it's the same thing with some of these monuments or some of these names. You have to think about how history has been framed, what we've learned about that person, and what we've chosen to remember and what we've chosen to forget. Public memory is very selective. And oftentimes, just because it's remembered one way doesn't mean that's how it happened. One thing that he hit on was the idea of representation and representation. And he said representation is important and representation serves to create a new reality. So when we sugarcoat things or sanitize them, we're oftentimes not telling the full story. And the conversation surrounding a lot of these monuments and different names had to do with folding in other bits of history that had been forgotten in previous tellings of those stories. And for me, it got a lot bigger because again, I wanted to think critically about these things, and something that I knew we hadn't done before, and I just for whatever reason started doing this one afternoon, was I turned to Indiana's 92 counties and started looking at the folks that they were named for. Expanding the assignment, it's hard to narrow something like this, honestly, because it's hard to focus on one thing when these inequities are so deeply entrenched in our society and our culture and our past. Our history is inherently racist at times. And one professor, Eric Sandweiss, that I spoke to said, you know, it's not the Mason-Dixon line. There is this gray area where the very substance of our blood flow as a nation is filled with these cells that can't help but circulate throughout the body. Racism touches every single aspect of our lives, regardless of your color, creed, race, religion, you know. It is such an important and foundational piece, to be honest, of American culture and American history that you can't just narrow it down. You have to interrogate everything. And so about a third of Indiana counties are named for people who were either slaveholders or otherwise propped up these racist policies. It's important, there are a few caveats with any kind of historical analysis like this. Obviously, most Indiana counties were named pre-Civil War. It's important to acknowledge that oftentimes when we're naming things after people, those names are being given based on the sentiment and understanding of the subject at that time. It doesn't mean, though, that we can't go back and revisit that, and that we shouldn't revisit that. We very much should. It's our responsibility to interrogate that history and maybe right some of those wrongs. It's important to note that just because slavery wasn't legal here, it wasn't technically practiced here, it still appeared in things such as, I mean, indentured servitude was practiced here, and there were people who very much tried to bring slavery to the territory and to the state. It's also worth noting that a now expunged article from the 1851 Indiana Constitution did stipulate that, quote, no Negro or mulatto shall come into or settle in the state. That's made pretty clear. It is obviously, like I said, now expunged. There was at one point a policy requiring all free Blacks to register and carry cards. Those are, if you're interested, those are at the Indiana State Library, and they are fascinating to look through, just because it's a part of our history that a lot of people will think, oh, since slavery wasn't a thing here, there's none of that history to explore. But it's everywhere. And it's definitely, I wasn't taught as a student of history in elementary school in Bloomington. And it wasn't something that I was taught in high school or really even college. This was something I learned post-grad. So when it came to looking at the county namesakes, I just sat down and started going through the list of namesakes given by the state. It's available on the state website. And just started researching. The list itself is not complete, mostly because COVID restrictions kind of keeps you from some libraries, and I mostly had to do a lot of my work online. There are some really obvious ones, you know, Thomas Jefferson fathered children with a woman that he owned, and Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Native Americans. when you look at people like Benton County is named after Thomas Hart Benton, the Missouri senator, not the painter. He was a champion of manifest destiny. And I very much labeled this particular quote from him as what we would now consider to be white supremacy. That was a call that I made, and I'm very confident in making that call. He spoke to Congress in 1846 and said that it would seem that the white race alone received the divine command to subdue and replenish the earth. That kind of jumps off of this idea that it was our destiny to, expand and to, again, subdue and replenish the earth. But it also very much speaks to these ideas that still exist within our culture and in not even just in corners of the internet anymore, are very publicly spoken about. This idea that white people are somehow superior and it is our destiny to do that. We have been given the divine command to do that. So that's why Thomas Hart Benton made the list. And that's why I chose to label it as white supremacy, even though he probably, that wasn't even a concept at that point, didn't have the language for it. But it's also worth noting that Generals Francis Marion and Daniel Morgan enslaved people, and President James Monroe was an interesting case. There were a couple other people on here, Henry County, Patrick Henry. There are folks who supported abolishing the practice of slavery and spoke about slavery being, this unfortunate evil that we needed to eradicate, but they also owned people. James Monroe enslaved up to 250 people while also advocating for, abolishing slavery. So there's these nice little, not nice, but these little contradictions within history that I thought were necessary to explore, or to at least include. Part of the reason why I found this so interesting and why I chose to expand the assignment in this way was because people often choose not to or just don't challenge their understanding of the world around them. And this forced people to recognize that we still had quite a past to unpack. I think everybody knows about the Indiana Klan past and knows about those connections, but doesn't think even deeper into the history. I got a lot of notes from people who were not very happy about these particular articles, but I don't think that it was, I don't think that the work was any less important. I'm not here to make everybody happy. History is not something that is supposed to make you feel good all the time. I think that if you're feeling uncomfortable and you're acknowledging things that feel kind of gross, you're doing the work. You have to think about how this has impacted you, how history has been framed for your understanding, and how it has benefited you in some cases, and how it has hurt other people in some cases. It goes to show that the work is never done. Inequity, inequality, and racism, they're just so deeply entrenched in society and culture, and even right here in Indiana with Hoosier hospitality, it's everything. It's everywhere. So I was happy in some kind of odd way to receive as much hate mail as I did for these. Obviously, some of it was concerning. I did get some that I had to forward to some editors. But again, I mean, I whether or not they took that away from it, I got more emails probably thanking me for the work than I did from those who were mad at me for having done the work. So that's kind of an overview of the decisions that I made and why we really kind of pursued this as an angle anyway, and what I found. If you guys have any questions or would like to discuss any of those things, maybe ask me, how I came to these conclusions, whatever. I am absolutely happy to answer whatever you've got. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll leave it open for you guys. Yeah.
Yes, my question is something quite different. I must say, I come from the North Country, Wisconsin and Minnesota. They had their own problems. which I didn't know. But one thing that really startled me one day when I was in the State House here was to come from the basement into the steps that lead out onto Market Street and see the memorial to Oliver Morton, who I think is quite the opposite, that he should be acknowledged for having not convened the legislature for several years so that the Indiana could not vote to secede. And I think that requires recognition too. I found that astonishing.
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of heroes in our story as well. I think that work is fascinating. And I'm sorry that I didn't get to, I'm disappointed that I didn't really get to explore that any further. You know, the way that news moves, you know,
Yeah.
pulled off of this pretty quickly. But doing this and doing this work ended up taking a little bit longer, I think, than anybody anticipated. Mostly because they didn't set out to have me look at all my
Yeah. But good for you. Anyway, but there must be occasional things like Oliver Morton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I also went to school in Valparaiso, and I understood that when I was there in college that there had a black person had never spent the night in Porter County except on the Valparaiso campus. And that was in the 50s.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how all of that has just,
Yeah.
you still feel the echoes of that though, you know?
You do.
Holly,
So thank you.
what do you hope this series accomplishes?
I think for me, it was, and something that I talked about with Professor Sandweiss as well was, again, I think those of us at least, you know, my sister is a 5th grade teacher. I don't think when she was teaching Hoosier history last year as a 4th grade teacher that this kind of interrogation or even the idea that slavery still echoes through Indiana was part of that curriculum, right? I think that's something that she obviously wanted to work towards. COVID interrupted everything for her in her first year of teaching and now in her 2nd year of teaching. But I think what I wanted to get at more than anything was there's this whole part of our history that we've just chosen to either not teach or we just haven't turned on our critical thinking skills.
Right.
And so if nothing else, I wanted to call attention to just that part of our history that, you know, you can be taught that slavery wasn't practiced in Indiana, but it's so much deeper than that. And yeah, so for me, it was really just trying to call attention to that and to get people to think critically, which is really hard to do in 2020, because a lot of people kind of come to articles like this with their own ideas and they're going to hate it whether it's well written or it's well researched or not. So it's always kind of fascinating to me to hear people's perspectives on stuff like that. Because I did get one person who emailed me and asked why I hadn't written about Obama's ancestors possibly being slaveholders. And he was like, is it because it doesn't fit your narrative? And I emailed him back and I was like, literally, it does not fit the narrative of this story. If there was a county named after them, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm here to do. So
right.
Sorry about you.
So Holly, how do you respond to people who say that you hate America when you do this?
That's a really good question. Sometimes I don't. There are a few who, it has been really interesting. I've been called probably every name in the book at this point, including, you know, un-American, fascist, the Nazis would be proud of me, you know, all these different things. I've made several different groups of white supremacists angry. I think the best way to respond in some of these cases is just to remind people that I'm a real human. I think a lot of people are kind of those keyboard warriors, right? Who will get on there and they'll say anything because you're not a real person. And then they'll leave you their phone number. Just call them back. That's what I do anyway, sometimes.
Keyboard warriors.
Or often than not, they will hang up when I identify myself because they didn't actually want to talk to me. They didn't actually want to engage in discourse. They just wanted to be hateful. So yeah, so I pick and choose. It just depends if I've got time that day. And then the ones that get forwarded to my editors are usually the ones that are like a little concerning. I did get an email talking about an upcoming race war and how people were going to be ready. And it was very much, it crossed a line that I was uncomfortable with. It was talking about, white Christian Americans in the subject line. And I knew that that was a dead giveaway for a white supremacist. I've unfortunately been the default person in certain situations to reach out to the Klan or other white nationalist organizations. So I kind of knew that language and knew what to expect, and just kind of sent that to my editors. And I was like, hey guys, just so you've got this, just so you know what my inbox looks like today. So you have to pick and choose your battles more than any other time, I think, these days.
Hi, can I jump in, Ashley? Thank you. Holly, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I always find that very, very interesting. And with what I do in my public life, I tend to get some pretty hateful communications as well. Nothing, I'm sure, that what you receive. So I would just, first of all, want to thank you for your courage and your dedication. But my question is, I believe that race relations will be improved once there's more shared history. Some of the things that we've decided, or that was decided not to be promoted or shared, that it is brought forth and we all become more educated and engaged. So my question is, how do you foresee your work and the work of others having any impact on our K through 12, or in particular high school, our curriculums? So I believe if we teach the youngers the truth more, then things will get better as they get older.
I agree that that shared history kind of part will be crucial moving forward.
So do you see any effect with regard to?
Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, cool. It kind of cut out for a second, then caught back up. Anyway, I do agree that that shared history portion is vital, and it's going to be important moving forward. I think that as a journalist and as someone who is covering history as it unfolds, we just have to be more conscious of the people that we talk to, the angles that we take, the people that we feature. And I know when I was in high school and I was doing, we would have to do like current events assignments where we would pull different news features and we would talk about, the headlines of the day and how this affected us as high school students. I think as long as we can continue to be present in a classroom in some way, that'll be vital. Just continuing that conversation. I don't know. I haven't really thought about. I try not to think too much about how I actually impact things on the daily because it gets overwhelming sometimes. Like I said, that responsibility, I do feel the weight of that every single day. But I also just see this as, I go to work every day and I do the best I can for my community and for my state. And if that makes a ripple effect anywhere down the road, where the work that I've done because of the way that I have framed it and sourced it, if that makes it into a history book or a lesson plan or anything, that's my goal, is that moving forward, we just do better.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. What's up? You're muted. If you're asking me a question, I think you're muted.
Yes, textbooks don't reflect much of this, I think. Do you foresee textbooks being edited so that we include more of the real down to earth history? How do we make that happen?
I would hope that that becomes the case. I think that, as with anything, you have to look at the funding and who is writing these textbooks and
Of course.
how are they being acquired, what school systems are paying for them, what school systems won't pay for them. I think it requires kind of you have to turn a critical eye to our education system and ask, you know, who are we educating and what are we educating them for? And so if those textbooks can be written, if different texts can be integrated into classrooms, the 1619 project that the New York Times did is unbelievable. And I think it should be taught in high school history classes. And I think that in some schools it was, and in other schools it was not well received. And so there is that culture of change that is going to have to come forward, and it's going to take a long time. But in terms of like class set textbooks, I think you're going to have to follow the money. I think you're going to have to figure out who and where and why and how.
Yeah, my understanding is that Texas buys so many books that they actually set the standard, and that's not a high standard.
Funny how that all works.
Holly?
Yeah.
How was the Indianapolis Star done on having a newsroom or a employees all throughout that matches the status of the city? And
that's a great question, and something that we actually all Gannett papers released diversity reports earlier this year, I think in August. We do okay. I think that we've got a fairly, and okay is a relative term here, right? I can pull up those numbers real quick actually, because that would be really interesting to take a look at. There we go. We were, let's see. Our newsroom is about 77.9% white, 13% Black, smaller fractions of Hispanic, Latino, and Native American. We are primarily, I think like most newsrooms, we're still primarily male. A lot of our leadership is white men. I think that that's something that we are going to be more conscious of moving forward. I know that that's something that our news director has been very intentional about his hires. I think I'm co-chair of our newsroom diversity committee. And quite frankly, I think that in order to keep that up and in order to continue to diversify our staff and our coverage, we're going to need to continue doing the work to retain those folks. It's not enough to recruit them, it's not enough to get them here. We have to create a space that is safe and welcoming consistently for them, that offers them opportunities. So we're doing okay. I hope we get better. Sally, I think you had a question too.
I do. It was along those same lines. I just wondered what else the Star is doing to change its arc of coverage.
Well, like I said, I think a lot of us are just being asked to be more considerate of how we source things. You know, it's not enough to go to the same 3 Black pastors every time. You know, it's not enough to rely on the same sources. We need to do the boots on the ground kind of work and get in the community and on the streets and talk to those people. Talk to residents who, quite frankly, have no reason to trust us and deeply distrust us. I don't blame a single person who tells me that they don't trust me to tell their story. I don't. I don't take it personally. We've given them no reason to believe that we're going to be consistent enough in this. And so creating a source database, doing trainings. I recently completed a pointer training talking about how we cover the ethics behind social justice movements. I'm a huge ethics geek. It kind of comes with history and ethics too. Just trying to push more as a diversity committee We've changed the style book. We obviously, Gannett and a lot of other outlets are capitalizing Black as a racial, as like an ethno identifier. But we've done more like, we no longer use the phrase officer involved shooting or police action shooting. We now tell our reporters to use very plain language saying that a police officer shot someone. Because that's what happened. If we sanitize it or use cop talk or jargon, it puts the responsibility on the person who was shot and not what happened. We also are no longer using the exact phrase unarmed Black man or peaceful protest, because by indicating that a Black man was unarmed, we're basically saying that it should have been assumed that he was armed. You can still report that in the story, but using that particular phrase is something that we're trying to get away from. In the same way that we no longer want to say peaceful protest, because it somehow indicates that those protests would otherwise be not peaceful. And let's be honest, everyone is out there exercising their First Amendment right to gather in peaceful protest. When things turn a little more violent or unruly, we can describe that in plain language as directly as possible. But there's no need to beat around the bush. We've been doing that for far too long and been not specific enough in our language. And it doesn't matter what we intend to say, we're saying something else. So it's, again, it's the Spanish linguistics degree that has me thinking about those little language changes, that if we can do that, then our community can also make those changes. And what we're communicating is completely different.
Great, thank you.
Holly, do you have a few minutes to stay after our closing to answer any additional questions?
Sure.
Thank you. In honor of your presentation today, we will be giving a donation to Amethyst House, which is a local women's shelter here in Bloomington. And Sally, would you tell us about next week's program?
So excited. Okay, so next week we get Bloomington's own poet, Ross Gay, who's actually going to be reading from the Book of Delights. I'm so excited. If you don't know Ross Gay and his work, oh, you are in for a treat. And if you do know, you know how wonderful it's going to be. So, yay, next week.
Thank you. Michael, please share our four-way test graphic. We can recite this together to close our meeting. Of the things we think, say, and do, first is the truth. Second is fair talk. Third, will
Goodwill and better friendships.
Fourth,
will it be beneficial to all concerned.
And fifth
is
fun. Thank you.